Benjamin Franklin, one of America's presidents, had famously said, "Nothing is certain except death and taxes." So we believe that bad things happening to otherwise good brands, which is brand transgressions, should be added to the list.
We think the brand transformation took place when Starbucks shut down all its 8,000 plus coffee shops in the United States, and the entire organization was sent on a diversity and racial equity training.
This is a case where it was not a transgression on Maggie's part, but the response to the transgression became a transgression in itself.
We believe that Boeing violated many of these principles, and the end is not anywhere near.
One thing no one knows about you, Shelley.
I steal Shalini's wrinkle reduction creams.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Jasravi. For conversations at the edge, subscribe to my channel. For ideas with edges that make you get up and want to do something. Here we have Shelley and Shalini, and we'll be talking about a very different topic today. No brand wants to witness it. No consumer wants to go through that disturbance, but it happens, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. If you can talk about another familiar example, Maggie, or any other example, just to explain what is a brand transgression, why it's so important to understand, what has happened and how to go about it.
Maggie noodles is a staple in India after rice and, gehu. And it had captured about 80% of the noodle market. A routine, almost random check by a food inspector on one of its Maggie noodle packets, he discovered that it had higher than allowed levels of MSG in it. And as we know, MSG has associated health implications. A large segment of the consumers are children. And so, of course, there was natural concern, outrage amongst the Indian population. And there was a fairly significant negative media coverage. Now, Nestle, as a Swiss brand, understandably so, took the position of, no, our products do not have higher than normal levels of MSG. We do our own internal testing and we are certain of it. And they provided several technical, legal justifications. And unfortunately, that was probably, in hindsight, not the best response, because they were perceived as perhaps defensive. They were not empathetic or sympathetic with the consumer concerns. And they used the legalistic defensive pursuit to protecting or defending their brand. So actually their CEO, I believe his name was Buckley, said at some interview, "We were so right, yet we were so wrong." They took the government on, and it became a very public battle between Nestle and the government of India. Again, never a good idea for a multinational who is, in a host country, particularly a country like India, which has already got a reputation of very bad experiences with multinationals. We remember, all of us remember the Bhopal tragedy and others, Coca-Cola being asked to leave the country. So one would say that despite inordinate amounts of time and investment of resources in building the brand, Nestle missed the point here. because they took on. So finally, of course, they went through the court system, and it was found that Nestle was right, and that they did not have excessive levels of MSG. However, this very public battle with the government lasted several months, and it really damaged Maggie's market share in India.
Yeah.
I believe they had to, there were 3 to 4 different changes in leadership during this crisis, which seemed to suggest, people can think various things, but suggest a lack of clarity, a confusion, unable to kind of control the narrative. They lost control of the narrative. So even though this is a case where it was not a transgression on Nestle's part, Maggie's part, but the response to the transgression became a transgression in itself.
Oh.
Right? And they lost control of the narrative.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this is an example of what not to do when you're caught in the crosshairs. And, apparently I believe it was like a 50,000 rupee fine, and they could have settled it and had proper testing and all of that done, and it never needed to go to this level because the media frenzy was just astonishing, and it was not positive.
Interestingly, we are starting with an example of what not to do, and the role of leadership and the accountability that I'd request that you get into as we go into the examples later. But isn't this very, very interesting that it was not a transgression, but it became a transgression? And from Nestle's point of view, like you said, the leadership acknowledged we were so right, but so wrong, because if they just had put their shoes of the consumers, they would have realized the horror that every mother would have felt, every student would have felt every time, Maggie, like you said, was staple. So, if they just would have, looked at, had that empathy, things would have been much easier, because it was not about whether you're right or wrong. It was about, hello, you owe it to us. There is a Boeing, if you talk about huge crisis, perhaps still continuing, lives lost. I mean, what can one say? So something like that happens. If you could talk about how that transgression happened, what was the challenge, and what you think was the response, or should not have been or have been, and which principle to keep in mind?
So Boeing's case is evolving right as we are speaking. And it all started with the first crash of the 737 MAX in 2018, and then the second one, which happened in March. It's kind of flippant to say, products fail at times. And that could sound like we are minimizing the loss of lives. 346 lives were lost. That's not at all the intent of what I'm saying. But it was the response, and almost the flippant response, which pretty much started Boeing going down a rabbit hole of sorts in terms of how they should not have responded to the transgression. So when the first crash took place, the then CEO attributed the crash to the poor protocol following on the part of the Ethiopian Airlines pilots who were navigating the plane. And it was essentially, if you think about it, it was essentially deflecting. It was a defensive response. We are not at fault. The pilot was at fault. They did not follow protocol. We had everything, all the ducks were lined up, and so on and so forth. An extremely predictable but disastrous response. It was disastrous, particularly because a second crash took place 6 months from then, and Lion Air. And this time also, the response was maybe those pilots were also not well trained, but with 2 data points back to back, the world was curious. that is this the correct hypothesis or is there something else going on? I think that was the start of Boeing's troubles, really. If they had at that point in time said something which showed empathy for the victims, really heartfelt empathy for the victims, and promised restitution which was adequate, and said, we are taking accountability, we will get to the root of it. I'm not saying we are responsible. It is we are accountable. We made these planes, and we will make sure that we get to the bottom of it and make sure this doesn't happen again. There is no legal issue here. We are not saying we are at fault. And there was virtually no empathy for the victims that we saw in the first couple of times that the CEO responded in press. And thereafter, I think they had already started digging a hole for themselves, because the amount they offered to each victim was seen as a pittance, particularly in light of their deflecting the blame onto the pilots. And as you probably know, and many of the listeners and viewers know, over the last 5 years, lots more scrutiny has taken place. And it has been pretty much proven that Boeing's obsessive pursuit of profit could have been responsible for this situation. And I'm saying obsessive, I'm not trivializing profit. I think profits are important. But it seems that in the effort to garner more profit, the company cut costs, which could have compromised on the sourcing of their product for making the planes. That is one problem that they apparently faced in terms of production. In addition, there was a competitive issue here where Boeing wanted to stay ahead of Airbus, and Airbus was on the verge of snagging some orders or had already snagged some orders. And there was a rush to produce the planes. And the old adage goes, haste makes waste. And in addition to the hasty production of the planes, as well as the cost cutting, which did not help the quality of the output, the company is ultimately seen as liable in terms of the two crashes. And in the last few months, it seems that some of the whistleblowers of Boeing who had raised red flags during the production process were not given free voice. In fact, the last CEO, the CEO before the current CEO, said in public court that we are responsible. We did actually hushed the whistleblowers. He actually acknowledged that. And currently, I think there is criminal prosecution that Boeing is facing. To add, unfortunately, pardon the pun, but to add fuel to fire, in January of this year, a Boeing aircraft which was being flown by Alaska Airlines, its door flew open. And again, fortunately, there were nobody was hurt. But again, the production issues came to the fore. And now people are pretty concerned that Boeing's product is really, really not good. Then the space issue that happened, which was again, Boeing was again under scrutiny. And more recently, literally hot off the press, Boeing is facing a potential strike by their workers. And this is right under the nose of the new CEO, Kelly Ortberg. So I think the response to the transgression started with blame deflection and not taking accountability, being slow in responding empathetically to the victims, and even shortchanging the victims in terms of the proposed restitution. So the principles that capture the poor response of Boeing were, they did not do the right thing. The doing the right thing we mean that first and foremost, acknowledge the pain and the hurt of the victims. Before you try to protect your brand, before you try to protect your shareholders' wealth, which is important, you first acknowledged, yes, pain has been caused, somebody is hurt, and we really need to take cognizance of that. They did not do that. Then there's another principle we talk about, act transparently. They did not act transparently. In fact, it was anything but transparent. Then we say take accountability. They did not take accountability of the situation. Instead, they passed the blame onto the pilots, and they kept pushing it as much as possible, distancing themselves from the situation, and then put principle over profit. Clearly, that was a principle that they violated. So in our understanding, based on our research, we believe that Boeing violated many of these principles, and the end is not anywhere near. I think Boeing will be facing a lot more challenges and turbulent weather in the next 3 to 4 years. We are very hopeful, to be honest. Shalini and I are keenly following the case. And Kelly Ortberg said some things which was literally song to our ears. He said, we want to go back to the great engineering organization we were, and we will become transparent. We hope his hands are not tied. We hope his directors support him, and we hope he's able to navigate through the crisis of the impending strike. So those are the critical events which Boeing has to overcome.
I guess a lot is going wrong already for years before something like this starts becoming evident. Unfortunately, this is a product, like you said, that, it just causes such a lot of loss to life at such scale. And the trust is so difficult to get back. Anyways, it's a trust deficit world that we live in after COVID. I mean, everything crashed to zero. Tylenol, you've said, is the gold standard of how they responded. So if you could talk about that and see why and how they got it right and so right.
So, in our research of over 50 years of business cases, what we found almost unerringly is that leadership sets the tone, both in positive responses and in defensive responses or outright negative responses. So Tylenol's example is really fantastic because, again, as often happens with transgressions, they just spring on you, right? It's completely out of the blue. Nobody knows that it's coming. And so there was news in Chicago that there were 7 deaths. And it was somehow identified that it was related to Tylenol consumption. And this was in 1980. So at that time, there was no social media. But this was a huge crisis for Tylenol. And Tylenol had about, I believe, 40% of the market share. It was in everybody's home. It was the standard analgesic that people consumed when they had a headache, right? And so, and the pundit said that no matter what happens, this is the death of Tylenol. Nobody will ever put another Tylenol in their mouth, right? Because it was so serious. So what did the CEO at that time, James Burke, do? So he said, how must we protect the customer first? And second, how must we protect the brand? Now, he's not likely to have a lot of support for that amongst his C-suite at that time. Because nobody knew why. And so they said, like, are we taking accountability too soon, maybe, right? We don't even know if it's our fault. But it was this point that we talk about taking accountability. Even though we don't know what happened, somebody consumed our product and died. We have to own that, right? So he went at that time, very unusual. I think even today it is. He went on national television multiple times and apologized. And then he said, please do not consume our product till we work with the authorities and get to the bottom of it. And they, of course, were transparent with the regulators, and they said, come check our manufacturing facilities, our supply chain, everything. And they set up 24/7 hotlines where live human beings were responding to concerned consumers. They were giving refunds on used Tylenol bottles. And they had a 1-800 number set up where they had daily, multiple times a day updates on whatever new discoveries that were happening for the media. They even wrote letters to doctors and hospitals saying, don't give Tylenol or prescribe Tylenol to anyone. So this was a very unusual and maybe even shocking to some response, right? For a brand of this eminence to say, don't consume our product. Now, unfortunately, there was another incident that happened in California a couple of months later. I can't remember if anyone died, but they knew that somebody had consumed. And what they discovered was that somebody tampered with the Tylenol bottle and took out the Tylenol and replaced it with cyanide capsules, which is what killed the people who consumed it. So when this happened in California, the CEO again took the decision, stopped all advertising, stopped sales, removed all Tylenol from shelves nationwide because they couldn't risk another death. So this is another principle of ours, right? Treat each life with dignity. It's not that, oh, these are unnamed people, you know, who bought a Tylenol off a grocery store somewhere, but that life is valuable and we do not want any other life to be jeopardized. And so this level of transparency, this level of accountability, this level of ownership is why it's like our flagship example of our first principle, which is do the right thing.
Yeah.
And because they took this position, actually, consumers viewed them as victims of malicious attack rather than perpetrators of a poor product or improper manufacturing or something like that. And then, even better, the government in the United States actually, within 2 weeks, passed a law saying that pharmaceutical companies need to create tamper-resistant packaging. Now, this would come at a huge cost because you would have to change how you package your products, right? And Tylenol came up with a tamper-resistant packaging within 2 weeks. And that packaging is widespread in pharmaceutical companies today. So Shelley mentioned restitution, right? So of course they took care of customers who were suffering, they might, you know, but what did they do to assure us that such a problem would not happen again? So that's why in our understanding, it's a gold standard, which is not to say that Johnson & Johnson, you know, hasn't had transgressions and where they may not have responded as well. But CEO Burke's response and the position he took, we feel is really exemplary and something that all companies should try to follow. Now, usually brands don't do this because lawyers stop them.
Again.
Right? Because we are scared of lawsuits, and if you own anything, then you open yourself up, right? But here was also, you know, leadership involves elements of courage to do the right thing.
Setting the tone, like you said, yes.
And so Boeing didn't, you know, have the courage to take ownership, and they are $40 billion poorer today. Right? And how many more lawsuits still in the pipeline?
Yeah.
So deflection and blaming others didn't help them. And Tylenol regained its market share to 48% in a very short time.
And the trust of the consumer who's willing to put it back in his mouth to relieve themselves of headache and not lose their life, or at least have that fear of it and get headache. So, you know, this is amazing, you know, case that you shared. So Starbucks, if you could talk about Starbucks, and there is also any other example you want to take along with it, a Volkswagen or, you know, or Dolce & Gabbana, you know, and talk about some of your other principles.
Sure. So Starbucks, we think is another really wonderful example of what to do. when you're facing a transgression. And the story is that at a Philadelphia Starbucks outlet, there were two young Black customers who were waiting for a third business associate, and they were not in a rush to order, which is pretty much par for the course for a brand like Starbucks. You go there, you relax, you chill, there's no rush. You open your computer, you get on your phone. It's what they call the second home, right? The home away from home. However, for some reason in this particular case, the barista came to these two young people and said, when are you going to order? What do you want? What do you want? And after a few times when they said, we are waiting, we don't want to order, in a moment of, we think very poor judgment, the barista called the cops. And the cops took the two young Black customers, 24 and 25 years old, to prison for a few hours. And not surprisingly, this news caught fire. It went viral at warp speed. And the whole community of Philadelphia started really bristling and getting triggered before a large part of the United States started really getting angry. And we believe this was a terrific case to learn from, because the CEO, there was an initial indifferent tweet that the company made, which was, we are looking into it. And I think they learned their lesson really rapidly. I think the response was predicated on what they saw was becoming a conflagration. It was becoming a huge fire. And the CEO immediately, next day, flew to Philadelphia, met the two young Black men, apologized to them. Then he came on Facebook and apologized. He went on national TV, he apologized, 6 apologies in total. And he said, the barista was not at fault. The buck stops with me, which we thought was exemplary, even if it was strategic. We think it was exemplary. We keep the good and leave the bad, right? That's really what our book is saying. And so the good thing we learned was he did not blame the barista. He did not blame the environment. He said, I'm at fault. I take responsibility, which is leadership, which is courage. And the case kind of unfolded over the next few weeks. And where did the brand transformation take place? We think the brand transformation took place when Starbucks shut down all its 8,000 plus coffee shops in the United States, and the entire organization was sent on a diversity and racial equity training, which cost the company, I believe, $10 or $12 million. I may be off, but as far as the numbers are concerned. And so it's not just about recovery, it's also about transformation, which is really critical. And the company settled with these two young men. The company talked to the Philadelphia community. And these two young men then came on board with Starbucks to help them, guide them through the training program, and so on and so forth. So, and it was done at warp speed. It was done rapidly. The next day, the CEO flew over. There was no protracted board meetings. Should we do this? Should we do this? It was probably coming from the heart. Maybe it was coming from the urgency, but they reacted really, really fast. They did the right thing by acknowledging the victim's pain. And it was not just the two Black customers who were in pain. The entire African-American community felt hurt and slighted, given the history of their pain in the United States for centuries. So that was the context in which this case unfolded. So they did the right thing. They reacted at lightning speed. They not just took accountability, they took responsibility. They acknowledged it was their fault. They took care of the victims. They put principle over profit. I don't think there was a clinical cost-benefit analysis that if we do this, what is the impact on profit? If we do this, what is the impact on profit? I don't think there was a sensitivity analysis done like that, which is the point of this principle, that put principle over profit. And the leader set the tone. The leader pretty much defined how the company will respond to it. And they did not say there are only 2 customers. Who cares? It doesn't matter, right? Even 1 customer is too many. This is where they protected the dignity of every individual. And we think Starbucks, by the way, has a brand association of being extremely socially conscious. Of course, Mistakes happen, like with all brands, but it has a pretty strong association. So this was authentic to Starbucks, to be socially conscious, to create a moral roadmap and social roadmap where values are respected. Then the other case you mentioned is that of Dolce and Gabbana. And we are so grateful we came across that case. And it seems like a drop in the ocean when you think about Boeing and you think about Volkswagen and so on and so forth. But it has a very, very telling case. So the Dolce & Gabbana was lucky to be in China. China is the largest luxury market in the world, $60 billion, 25% of luxury goods purchases take place in China. So a luxury label like Dolce & Gabbana has to thank its stars when the country opens their doors to this brand. And they had, I think, 58 or 60 outlets when this event happened. And the event was that they had a huge, what we call fashion show. It was called the Great Show in Shanghai. And about 1,200 celebrities and 400 fashion models were supposed to be at the show, which was one of the largest of its kind in a very, very, very long time. And rightly so, the founders, Dolce and Gabbana, wanted to create some excitement around this show. So they created 3 advertisements or videos in which they showed a really pretty Chinese lady decked up in beautiful jewelry and traditional Chinese clothes, sitting and eating Italian food with chopsticks. So the chopstick implement is the Chinese product, and the food was Italian product. I think they wanted to show, this is our guess, this is our, giving them the benefit of doubt, if you will. They wanted to unite Italian and Chinese culture. We hope that was their goal. But what they ended up doing was perceived to be ghastly. The 3 videos, we really encourage the viewers and the listeners to see those 3 videos. If you simply search on YouTube, Dolce and Gabbana China, these 3 videos will pop up. So in these 3 videos, the same lady is trying to eat pizza or spaghetti or cannoli with chopsticks. And this is a lady, and a male voiceover comes and is telling her how to eat Italian food with chopsticks. So you can see the misogyny that can be perceived right there. A man is telling a woman how to behave. And of course, she is not able to do a good job. Chopsticks are not meant to be used to eat pizza or cannoli. So he's guiding her. And there are some words that were used which could have been taken completely out of context. And clearly, the creators of these videos did not realize, and those who approved these videos did not realize what a nightmare they were creating for the brand. So the long story short, after these videos were released, just think about it. They were all of 3 minutes. They're all of 3 minutes. Most of China as a country was up in arms. And the fashion watchdog website cried foul. They said Dolce & Gabbana is misogynistic. They are racist because they are showing Italy to be a superior culture to China. And there was even some, innuendos which could be mistaken to be sexual in nature, which was completely inappropriate. So, okay, as we said, transgressions happen. Unintendedly, inadvertently, you make mistakes. You don't see the banana peel and you slip and you say, oops. This can happen to the best of us. But it was their response which really created this nightmare for the brand. First of all, Dolce & Gabbana said that it was the creator's fault, whoever created those videos.
The agency.
Look at the contrast of Starbucks CEO saying, I'm responsible, versus the founder saying it was the creator's fault. They were deflecting blame. Then they did an apology the next day in Chinese, which appeared totally not authentic because it came across as we need to do something and let's do this quickly. And the biggest problem for the company was on an Instagram post, I don't remember which one, but one of the founders, in probably anger and defensiveness, said Chinese eat dogs. So they were basically pushing back and saying something to the effect that this is, again, this was a culturally insensitive comment. So the outcome of that is this happened 5 years back, and Dolce & Gabbana lost almost 20% of its market globally, and it has not been able to get back the doors which were closed in China. It is fortunate that it still has about 45, 50 outlets. All the Chinese celebrities and models who were associated with Dolce & Gabbana divorced themselves from the brand, partly because of their own values that were violated, partly because if they continued to be in Dolce & Gabbana's ambit, they would have faced hate mail from the Chinese consumers and the Chinese people. So this was a case of, we realize, we talk in classes of be culturally sensitive. I don't think this is a case of just cultural sensitivity. This is about indignifying a whole race, maybe inadvertently, but that's what it was tantamount to. And there are a couple of examples that we have in the book. A case of Ben & Jerry's, which is an ice cream brand, ice cream for crying out loud. And that brand has shown repetitively what it means to dignify human beings, repetitively, even at a cost of its own profit. And then there is another case we cover, which is Patagonia, which has lived up to its word of wanting to save the planet. Every human being is precious. Again, even at times when they have taken a hit in terms of their profit. Yeah, so these are the cases we cover about, every human being should be treated with dignity. Shalini.
We talk about the Taj Mumbai and the terrorist attacks.
Yes.
How the culture of the Taj, that the customer is God, is what led several of the Taj employees to die protecting their guests.
Without any respect for the planet, for nature, for environment, and treating them as stakeholders, we are not building the right values in the brand, in the culture of the organization, and it is going to show now or later. Sometime it will get picked up. And it was so interesting that a luxury brand, like luxury brands earlier were very snooty, and you see, you need to be in awe, you need to be looked up to. But hello, no, you could be a luxury brand, but you've got to respect the country you're in. You've got to, and be extra careful about what you're saying, how it's being perceived, and you cannot get away. So amazing. And it's all boiling down to the intangibles, it's all boiling down to, and hence the brand, what is getting woven in the DNA, and how it's evolving, and checks and balances on that proactively. So if they have to look at it proactively and say that, okay, can we have a strategy in place so that, we can smell something like this is happening, like Tylenol did, this can become big. This requires an introspection. This requires a training, perhaps. So proactively, long-term, the benefits and the approach, if you could, talk about summing up the principles that.
So, Benjamin Franklin, one of America's presidents, had famously said, nothing is certain except death and taxes. So we believe that bad things happening to otherwise good brands, which is brand transgressions, should be added to the list. No matter how big, no matter how great, you're going to transgress at some point. So to be prepared, and to be prepared well in advance, is a very good idea. And so our last chapter talks about brand authenticity, and we talk about Patagonia. So it was set up, this company was founded on, of course, wanting to sell sports equipment and then clothing, related clothing. But the passion of the CEO, Chunyad, was to protect the planet. So if you see the mission of Patagonia, it is, at any cost, we want to save the planet. And so everything that they have done in the company, from its inception has been baking in that value into their DNA, whether it was the use of organic cotton in the clothing, which was much higher than synthetic cotton, or several, like this is the one company. So Thanksgiving is the highest retail sale holiday in the United States. And Patagonia was the one company that took out an ad of one of their jackets and said, do not buy this jacket. So think about it. How unusual is it for a clothing company to say, don't buy our product? So basically, not only, and every time they have done it, they have increased their profit. So they're educating customers to be environmentally responsible, to think twice about not over-consuming products or buying. They were one of the first companies to launch reuse or recycle your gently used products. And it's, which company does that? They're repairing your products, they are saying reuse them, not saying buy the new one. And despite these kind of strategies, they have made profit year after year after year. And he says that people think I'm crazy, but whenever I've put the planet first, I'm paraphrasing, I've made more money. So if the purpose of business is profit, then when you build in the 8 principles into your DNA, you will make profit. There's no escaping it because you're doing all the things right? You're respecting each life with dignity, you're being transparent, you're protecting the planet, you're acting with lightning speed. So how can you go wrong? So even if a transgression happens, I think consumers all because you have this long history of responsible behavior, you are given the benefit of doubt versus an immediate negative reaction. So I'll let Shelley close out after that.
No, that's great. Thank you. That was beautiful. So, yeah, I think it's important for us to share one thing, which is that we are very, very pro-profit. Okay, we are not saying that put your heart on your sleeve and profits be damned. In fact, all the 50 years of research that we did and the 25, 30 cases that we cover, we were sensitive to this issue that, in the process of transforming your brand, it'll cost, there will be a hit, but at the end of it, the brand must emerge victorious and the victims must emerge as having been taken care of. So it should be a win-win for everybody. So this is very important. And what we are really saying is that an authentic brand, you're right, absolutely. You made a wonderful point that it's a buzzword and people are talking about it and so on and so forth. And in academic research, there are different definitions of brand authenticity. So we kind of boiled it down to a very simple, in our opinion, a very simple definition, which is an authentic brand is one which fulfills promises obsessively. You make a promise and there is no compromise on it. We made this promise and now we will stand. We are totally up for scrutiny if we fail. And when we fail, follow the other principles. That's really what you're talking about. So in terms of how can corporations, undergo some kind of transformation based on these principles, good travels at a snail's pace. We know that, right? And there is a very famous economic principle which has guided businesses globally, which was coined by an economist called Milton Friedman. And what he said was that the only social responsibility of a business is to make profit and to increase shareholders' wealth. I think what he was, in my opinion, he's right that we need to make profit because shareholders have put our trust in us. The social part, we are going to give a nuance to it. We'll give a wrinkle to it. In addition to pursuing profit, you really need to do it without hurting at a minimum. In fact, if you enhance social capital, it'll probably bring you more good than bad. And so training of the senior managers is super critical. So companies send their managers and their executives for all kinds of training, for all kinds of, let's go see how Toyota makes its cars in Japan. That's great. That's wonderful. Let's see how forests are being harvested and so on and so forth. So military is trained for crisis management. Marines are trained for crisis management, right? As children, our parents teach us how to protect ourselves from birth till as long as they have control over the child's decisions. We tell them, don't do this, be careful, be careful. So it should not be that hard for companies to start by saying, yeah, these oops moments are real, transgressions are real. Do we have a roadmap? Let's try to change our DNA. That let's be prepared for crisis situations. It's not that we are trying to identify who's the troublemaker, who's the problem creator, but we need to be prepared. And let's walk through these principles and see how do they resonate. And I'm reminded of a story of a brand called Scandinavian Airline Systems, which is not covered in the book. So it's an old case. SAS, it's an airline, and the airline was in big trouble in the 70s and the 80s. It had a context. It was the child of three, parents, and three organizations were managing it, which was a mess, and so on and so forth. And they were making losses. They were not doing great. Not the transgression we are talking about, but I think there's a lesson to be learned. Their new CEO was a guy called Jan Carlson, and he came in and he realized the company was in trouble. He was very, very clear about it. So one of the first things he did was, very famously, he published a book called The Little Red Book, which basically was circulated among all his employees, which said, we are in crisis and we need to do something about it. So, and then he engaged consultants who trained every single employee about what the new plan will be like and how do they need to respond, how do they need to change their practices, their behavior, their mindsets, and so on and so forth. So it was a crisis management kind of a case, and they did great. They succeeded. That was the first time business class was invented. SAS introduced business class on airlines, and they were not very punctual. After Jan Carlson took over, they became the most punctual airline in the world, and so on and so forth. So from crisis, they transformed themselves completely and they influenced the whole industry. But they trained every employee. Every employee was trained. Just like Starbucks trained all its employees in racial diversity and so on and so forth. We think there is scope for companies to train their employees in managing brand transgressions.
Awesome. Okay. So, Shelley, mother's best advice.
Eat grapes.
Did you know about this, Shalini? Alternate profession could have been Shalini.
Homemaker. Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. But I had to shoot you. It was fun. Okay. What would you do on Mars for fun, Shelley?
Make rabbit holes.
Okay. As per your spouse, your most often used phrase, and now we can check it right here.
No.
One thing no one knows about you, Shelley.
I steal Shalini's wrinkle reduction creams.
But a book you'd like to gift to all your friends. It cannot be your own, Shalini.
Tuesdays with Maury.
Okay. Shelley, what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
There is life after a difficult childhood.
Now, that's like a segue into, the next episode. Interesting. What's something new happening in your life right now, Shalini?
Our house is on sale.
What's your favorite childhood memory, Shelley?
Hiding under the bed after losing something that my mom had given me, and nobody could find me for 3 hours.
Oh my God. Did the power equation change with your mom? Very strategic. Now, I'd request you, so it's a wrap up. I'd request you to share any online addresses, emails where audiences can reach you, whatever you want to say about the book.
We have a website for our book, www.brandtransgressions.com. And there you have information on our LinkedIn profiles and how to reach us. And we look forward to continuing this conversation on our website and with anybody who'd be interested in taking it forward.
We really want this book to make a difference. We want somebody to read the book, use it, and make the world a better place. And we think this book has at least some ideas which could potentially forward that goal.
I just love the name and that you do things on the edge, so absolutely. I think this is a great forum for wonderful new ideas to come, cutting edge, new age, different. And I hope that your viewership and audioship increases and multiplies. Good luck.
So we've done a few podcasts, and this one has been singularly the most comprehensive. And I think we've talked at real depth, covering lots and lots of difficult issues. The way you approach these questions and frame these questions there was no rush here. We really went to the heart of the matter. We really went to the heart of the matter. And the fact that you have this branding and advertising experience from one of the most renowned marketing schools in India clearly shows, that you have a deep understanding of brands and leadership, and what are the rough edges of a brand, what are the smooth edges, and where do brands come from? You kept using the word trust so many times. And that comes from deep wisdom, that comes from an enormous amount of, just keeping your mind open and absorbing and working and so on. So I hope I can speak for Shalini. We are not just overjoyed, but we are deeply grateful to be on this particular podcast. And the connection was real, was authentic. And I have felt the most comfortable talking about what I did in this podcast. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the patience and the amount of time that you gave us to really dig deep into a very, very difficult topic.
Thank you so much.
I just want to share something. Thanks to you. I saw one of your podcasts with the neuro pricing guy in Germany, Professor Mueller. I was very fascinated by that podcast. I have a paper where we look at we scan the brain of consumers to understand how they respond to certain stimuli. And I have written to him on behalf of both Shalini and I, because the idea that came to my mind was he knows neuro testing, we know brand transgressions. So I have proposed to him, let's look at how the brain responds when brands transgress. And that could be an interesting idea. So thanks to you that I've written to him.
Only on my channel, such things are going to happen. And this is amazing. Thank you for sharing.